Chapter 4 is over the safe food handler. So within this chapter, we are going to talk about how food handlers can contaminate food. We're going to talk about hand washing procedures. We're going to talk about when and where hands should be washed, talk about antiseptics, when to use them, hand maintenance requirements, correct way to cover infected wounds, the importance of avoiding bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods, how to use single serve gloves and when we need to change them, requirements of work staff attire, jewelry that can pose a hazard to food safety, policies in regards to eating, drinking, and smoking as they relate to food, criteria for excluding staff from operation or restricting them from working with exposed food, utensils and equipment, and illnesses that need to be reported to the regulatory authority. So what happens, that stuff that we do that can contaminate food. So if we are at work and we have a foodborne illness, we're a carrier of it, we can contaminate food. If we have wounds or boils that contain some sort of pathogen that somehow comes in contact with food, we can contaminate it. If we sneeze or cough and we don't properly cover that sneeze and cough, if we're in contact with somebody that's sick, if we use the restroom and we don't wash our hands, and if we have symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, or jaundice, that yellowing of the eyes or skin, these are situations that can lead to food being contaminated and having some biological contamination. So some different actions as far as ways that we can contaminate our food. Gotta love the pictures that they put with this, right? Scratching your head, running your fingers through your hair, wiping or touching your nose, rubbing your ear, touching a pimple or an infected wound, wearing a dirty uniform, coughing or sneezing into the hand, spitting in the operation. I don't know why they would do that, but you know. So a couple of scenarios that show how food can be contaminated. A deli food handler is diagnosed with salmonella, fails to inform his manager he was sick, and then later determined to be the cause of an outbreak that involved more than 200 guests through 12 different items. Okay. Another scenario, a food handler with diarrhea did not wash his hands after using the restroom. He made close to 5,000 people sick when he mixed a vat of buttercream frosting with his bare hands and arms. It just, as far as, thinking about, things like that, and you go, well, why would that happen? It's just, I don't know. Again, when you read about it and you're talking about it and stuff, it's like, oh, I would never do that. But how often, just looking at how often do you touch your face? Don't even think about it. It becomes second nature. Some of you are probably doing it right now because I mentioned it, right? It's just something that it's a action that we don't even think about. It's just an automatic thing. We, scratch our head, or we touch our nose because or we're rubbing our ear, we're doing something around our face, we're wiping our eye, things like that we don't even think about. And by doing that, we have the potential to transmit any bacteria or stuff that might be there onto the food, especially if we're not taking proper precautions as far as hand washing, no bare hand contact for ready to eat foods, things along those lines. So it's some of these things you look at and you go, ooh, that's gross, would never do that. But then there's other things that is just kind of second nature. We don't even think about it that way. Okay. Now, on the flip side, there are some diseases that are not transmitted through food. Now, when we hear these items, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't want those people that have that touching my food because it's going to make me sick. Well, that is not the case. If staff has HIV or AIDS, tuberculosis, hepatitis B or C. While they may be scary words and things that are like, oh my gosh, because we know through our health class and stuff when we were growing up that, hey, those things spread through bodily fluids. However, they're not spread, they are spread through bodily fluids, but are not spread through food. Okay. So there are laws concerning staff for those, especially that have HIV or AIDS, and those who have the tuberculosis, Hep B or C. There's actually protection for people that have those diseases, and it prohibits employers from either firing them or transferring them out of food handling duties because they have those diseases. In fact, employers have to maintain the confidentiality of any staff who has that illness that is not foodborne. All right. So if you are a chef, you find out that one of your cooks has, Hep B, or they have HIV or what have you. How you found that out, you through ADA regulations have to maintain the confidentiality of that person. So you're not out there saying, oh, guess who has Hep B or guess who has AIDS. That can get you in a lot of trouble, can get you sued because it is an ADA violation. So we need to make sure and understand that, there are rights and protections through the ADA when it comes to employees that might have these illnesses and stuff. So, again, there's other ones, we've talked about as far as the biological side, that if they have them, we need to exclude them from food while they're sick. But there are other illnesses, just like what we're talking about now, that even if they have them, it's not transmitted through food. So you cannot legally fire them or transfer them out of the kitchen because of that illness. And as I said earlier, you have to maintain the confidentiality of it as well. So you can't be telling other people that so-and-so has whatever the illness may be. So what we want to focus on as PICs, people in charge, or the person in charge, is good personal hygiene programs. And so we want to make sure we have personal hygiene policies in place as far as standards for our employees, making sure we're training food handlers on the policies and make sure we're retraining regularly to make sure that they are up to date with the latest codes and that they're following what the policies and procedures are. Make sure you're modeling correct behavior at all times. You don't want to be in a situation where it's a do as I say, not as I do. Okay? Make sure that you are following the rules that you are setting for your employees as well. As a manager, you're supervising the food safety practices to make sure that everything is being done in a safe manner, that we are not having increased risk of our customers getting sick because of how we are preparing our food. And then, of course, we need to make sure we revise personal hygiene policies when the law or the policies or the science have changed for it. Okay? It's things that we want to make sure that we are keeping up to date. Again, it's being proactive rather than reactive to our situations. To talk about that in other chapters, especially just in chapter 3, trying to create proactive environments where we are working to prevent things from happening instead of reacting to a situation when it actually occurs. One of the most effective things that we can do as far as good personal hygiene is wash our hands. Again, it seems common sense. We've been told that since we were extremely young. When we could first start, washing our hands on our own, it was something that, our parents, grandparents, whoever, raised us, really, pushed for us to make sure that we were doing. Yet sometimes we forget about it. It's not something that we always are thinking about. And so we need to make sure that we are practicing these safe techniques to make sure that our hand washing is being done correctly and that we are making sure that all of our employees are sticking to this policy on a regular basis. So first and foremost, where do we wash our hands? All right. First thing is we want to make sure we are washing our hands in sinks that are designated for hand washing. All commercial kitchens are required to have hand washing sinks specifically set up for washing hands, not for doing dishes, not for filling pots or anything like that. It's specifically for hand washing only. We are never to be washing our hands in food prep sinks or dishwashing or sinks that are used for discarding wastewater. We want to make sure we are keeping those separated out. So that's the first thing. Making sure we're washing our hands in those designated hand washing places makes a huge difference. And again, it's something the health department's going to look at and making sure that you and your employees are washing their hands correctly in the approved sinks and such. How do we wash our hands? Again, I feel like I'm back in grade school or something like that. The whole process takes about at least 20 seconds or so to do. So you're going to wet your hands and your arms with running and warm water. You want the water as warm as you can stand it. You don't want to be scalding hot because you don't want to burn yourself, but you also don't want cold water because that doesn't help either. So we want to use water as hot as we can possibly go without it burning us. Apply soap. Make sure you're getting enough to get a good lather so it's really does its job. We scrub our hands and arms vigorously 10 to 15 seconds, making sure we're getting under the fingertips, between the fingers, under the fingernails, the whole 9 yards coming along with it. Some people, you were probably younger, sang a song. One of the ones I always remember was singing "Happy Birthday" to myself. Out loud if you choose to, but if you do that in the commercial kitchen, people might look at you a little funny. That's about a 10 to 15 second, depending on how fast you sing, comes from there. Then you rinse your hands and arms thoroughly with running warm water, and then dry your hands with either a single-use paper towel or a hand dryer. I am a single-use paper towel guy. Hand dryers drive me insane. Y'all been to the restrooms and gotta put your hands underneath the hand dryer. It takes you like 2.5 hours to dry your hands under it. The problem that is for us in the industry, if you're using hand dryers, what's going to happen? What are you going to do? You're going to get tired of keeping your hands in hot air. You're going to wipe your hands on your apron or on your pants or something like that, which potentially recontaminates the hands that you just washed. Now, if you notice, it says wet hands and arms. When it's talking about arms, we're not doctors or nurses or anything, so we're not scrubbing up to our elbows, but you do want to make sure you're getting your wrists and your hand, because there's a potential that your hand and your wrist will come in contact with food. Right? So we don't have to scrub up to our elbows, but we do want to make sure we're not forgetting about our wrists and stuff as well. So our hands are all washed. Now, of course, we need to make sure we head out. If we are coming into a different location, there's a door. Avoid contaminating your clean hands. Use a paper towel to turn off the faucet and to open the door. Out of curiosity, do any of you do that when you're out in the restrooms at a restaurant or something like that? I know if they have paper towels, I usually dry my hands and I use that towel, and that's what I open the door with if it's a pull, and then dispose of the garbage can, because remember, other people do not wash their hands when they leave the restroom and they're touching that handle. So by using that paper towel, you are shutting off you are preventing the bacteria that might be on that door handle from recontaminating your hands. Same thing goes with turning on and off the faucet. You turned on the faucet with dirty hands, right? So if you turn off the faucet with your clean hands, but don't use a towel, then you're potentially recontaminating your hands that you just cleaned, Right. I know there's some restrooms that now have like a thing down there. You can use your foot to help open, or even an arm thing that sticks out to put your like forearm in to help open the doors and stuff. But no matter what, again, just making sure that you're conscientious that you're not recontaminating your hands after you've washed them. When do we wash our hands? So we must wash our hands before we prepare food. So again, you first walk into a kitchen, the first thing you do, wash your hands. You know, you've gone and worked with something that's non-food related, and you get to go back to work with food. What do? Wash your hands. Okay. If you're working with clean equipment and utensils, you want to make sure that you wash your hands beforehand, because again, we don't want to take hands that are dirty and touch clean utensils or clean equipment with it. And before putting on single-use gloves. And you might say, well, why do I gotta do that? Because the gloves are a barrier. Well, the thing is, if you have dirty hands and you're touching the gloves, what are you doing? You know, you're putting bacteria on the outside of the glove from your hand that you're supposed to be using to protect the food from bacteria. So you wash your hands, dry them, then put on your gloves. All right. Now, after when you wash your hands, first one, hopefully is an obvious one. After you use the restroom, wash your hands. If you touch your face or your clothing, you want to wash your hands. Again, you might have contaminated your hands. If you've coughed, you sneezed, you've blowing your nose, using a handkerchief or a tissue, you're coming in contact with your face, wash your hands. You've sampled some food, you had a quick drink, you went out for a smoky treat, you've been outside chewing gum or chewing tobacco, you get back into the kitchen, wash your hands. If you've handled any dirty items, dirty plates, things along those lines, wash your hands. If you've handled raw meat, seafood or poultry, please wash your hands before you handle anything else. That's definitely an easy way to cross-contaminate. Of course, if you're taking out the garbage is soiled items, is dirty. Again, wash your hands after you've done those different items. Something else you see up there as well, the picture that goes along with it, falls along is too. If you're handling service or aquatic animals, so if you are you have a live lobster that you're working with or something like that. If you're handling chemicals that might affect food safety. If you're changing tasks before beginning a new task, you're working with one product, you might have gotten some contamination on your hands, wash your hands before you start the next thing. If you leave the kitchen or the prep area, you need to wash your hands. If you handle money, so if you are working the register and then you need to go, prep something or get something done, you need to wash your hands after. Money is really dirty. Think about all the hands that's been through, where it might have been. There's a lot of potential contaminants on money. Using your electronic devices, like the picture there says, you pull out your cell phone, you're using it, you need to wash your hands before you get back to working with food. Anything that may contaminate the hands, obviously you want to wash your hands after. Okay. So what happens if you've touched food or food contact surface with unclean hands? So the corrective action that you would need to take is you need to get rid of the contaminated food. You need to clean potentially contaminated equipment and utensils. That's wash and sanitize. And then as the person in charge, as the chef, the kitchen manager, you need to make sure you're retraining or you're coaching those food handlers who are not following the correct procedure. So if they're not following correct hand washing procedures, you do need to follow up with them to make sure that things are being taken care of and that everything is ready to go. So something I want to say newer, I guess, on the market would be hand antiseptics. So that's the sanitizing, the hand sanitizers that people like to use. They're usually a liquid or a gel form. Now they have a foaming style, of course, as well. And the job of the antiseptic is to lower the number of pathogens that are on the skins, to kill any remaining pathogens that might be there. So if we're using hand sanitizer, hand antiseptics, they have to make sure that they're complying with standards to make sure that they are safe for us to use and that we're not going to be making anybody sick. So it works with CFR and FDA regulations. FDA, I'm assuming you're familiar with, Food and Drug Administration. CFR is Code of Federal Regulations. So we need to make sure that they meet those standards. They're only used after hand washing. Okay. So you don't sanitize your hands, use hand sanitizer or hand antiseptic and then wash your hands. And it never is used in place of hand washing. Okay. It's a additional layer of security when it comes to sanitation. Okay. It's not a replacement for hand washing. Okay. And if you're using those hand antiseptics, you need to make sure your hands are allowed to dry before you're touching any food or equipment. Again, we don't want the risk of a chemical contamination to go along with that. So hand care. Some requirements for food handlers. You need to make sure that your fingernails are short and clean. Starting in the kitchen here at ICC for 150, that is a requirement. You need to have your fingernails short and clean, no false nails, no nail polish. Okay. Long fingernails, you have long fingernails, they're harder to keep clean. They can rip gloves, bacteria and stuff can get up underneath really easily, and they can also chip and become physical contaminants if we're not careful. We need to make sure that even though the nails are short and clean, that they're cleaned and short well. If they're real ragged, jagged nails, they can be hard to keep clean. They can also hold any pathogens and stuff, so bacteria that could become contaminants, or if they can break off and become physical contaminants. False fingernails are hard to keep clean. Again, you got to get up and underneath to make sure there's no bacteria or anything that's hiding in there. Can also break off into food. We don't want false fingernails, as an addition to somebody's super chili right now or what have you. And then nail polish. For one thing, the color can disguise dirt, so it's harder to tell if you have dirt on or under the nails, and it could flake off into food. Again, another physical contamination that could happen if you are wearing nail polish. So just so you're aware of ahead of time, the policy here at the Culinary Arts Institute is that first one there. You got to keep your fingernails short and clean, no false nails, no nail polish, as far as being in the kitchens here at the Culinary Institute. So what happens if you've got some wounds or cuts? Right? And if there are infected wounds or cuts, that means that they typically contain pus in it. And that's going to be something that if the pus escapes, then it could get into the food and cause potentially biological contamination. If they're open or they're draining, they must be covered at all times. So how a wound is covered is going to depend on where it's at. If it's the hand, the finger, or the wrist, then you're going to cover with some sort of impermeable cover, such as a bandage or a finger cot, and then a single-use glove goes over top. If it's your arm, you cover it with a Band-Aid. If it's another part of the body, you cover with the dry, tight-fitting bandage. Is where those all come together. Again, we don't want any nasty stuff getting into our food on accident. Okay. The biggest thing is we want to make sure that they're completely covered, especially when you're working around food. Okay, bare hand contact and ready to eat food. This is a tough one for a lot of people. So never, ever, 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 ever did I mention ever handle ready to eat food with your bare hands. All right. And it's especially true when you serve high risk populations. The best rule of thumb is to not bare hand ready to eat food. All right. Now, technically, it says ready to eat food unless the food's an ingredient in a dish that does not contain raw meat, seafood, or poultry, or the dish is going to be cooked to 145 degrees. If it comes up and it's going to be cooked to required minimum temperature, then it's good to go. But if it's something that's going to go directly onto the plate out to the consumer, you want to either glove if you're going to use your hands, or use another instrument in order to make sure that you're not coming in contact. So tongs, spoons, something along those lines. Okay. But just as a good rule of thumb, if the food is going directly to a plate, make sure that you're not direct contact with it. Okay. Single-use gloves. So single-use gloves can be great, but they are very prone to misuse. I think we have this like 10-foot tall and bulletproof mentality when we wear gloves, that as soon as we put gloves on, it's like a magic barrier that protects us from everything at all times. And all I got to do is wear this one set of gloves and I'm good for the entire shift. Right. And again, I'm being slightly sarcastic there. Well, maybe more than slightly. But it's one of those that I think we get into a lull. We think this false sense of security that as soon as we put gloves on, the world is right and nothing's going to be an issue. We need to make sure we are using them correctly, because if we are not, then we are probably ended up transferring more bacteria when we're not even thinking about it. All right. So first thing is you still got to wash your hands. Right? It's never used in place. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but never use it in place of hand washing. Again, you want to use it when handling ready to eat foods, except when you're washing produce. And if you're handling a ready to eat ingredient that's going to be cooked. Okay. So if I'm going to, I don't know, take some cheese, and yeah, that's a ready to eat food, but then that cheese goes onto a burger and it gets cooked to the correct temperature, then I can handle that cheese without wearing gloves. But if I'm just picking up some cheese to sprinkle on top of a salad, then I do not bare hand that cheese. I put a glove on to do it, or I use a pair of tongs or something along those lines to do it. Okay. So again, like I keep saying, make sure that you're being conscientious of how that goes and never bare handing ready to eat foods. So which gloves do you buy? First of all, food service gloves are the ones you want to purchase. There's different types. There's the plastic, there's the more nylon style, the latex. A lot of places are getting away from the latex just because of potential latex allergies that people have. And we don't want any allergic reactions because of the gloves that people are wearing. So again, making sure that they're, food service based gloves. Make sure that we are using them as disposable. It's a one and done. We don't wash them and reuse the gloves. That's really weird. Definitely a cheapy type thing. And yes, I know right now gloves are crazy expensive, but we still have to understand it's a one and done. Once you're done with them, they go in the garbage. You don't try to reuse them. We want to make sure we have multiple sizes. Not everybody wears a size small glove. I wear an extra large glove. However, if you don't and you wear an extra large, you have to wear an extra large glove, it's going to be swimming on you. And that's actually can be a safety issue because you're not going to have good control of the product that you're working with. So we need to make sure that we have multiple sizes available for different size hands. Okay. And like I said just a bit ago, making sure we are conscientious of the fact that people can be sensitive to latex. So we want to make sure we're providing gloves made in those other materials, because last thing we want to do is somebody to have a reaction because of it. Okay. So how do we use gloves? Of course, like I said earlier, we got to wash our hands before putting gloves on. We select the right glove size. Hold the glove by the edge, where closer to where by your wrist. Once your gloves are on, check them for rips and tears. Some things you should never do is blow into the gloves. I know sometimes people do that because they hope that's going to go on easier, especially when your hands are wet or sweaty. If that's the case, though, go wash your hands and dry them thoroughly. All right, that will help with that. Never roll the gloves to make them easier to put on. You're touching more of the surface of the gloves, which potentially spreads contamination, possibly. And of course, like I said earlier, never wash and reuse gloves. Remember, it's a one and done. Okay. The biggest things you want to try to avoid touching the glove with your bare hands as much as possible. So again, you're not potentially spreading contamination. So when do you change them? Right? Often, right? As soon as they become dirty or they're torn, before you begin a different task. So you switch out your gloves with different tasks that you're working on after an interruption. So if you have to take a phone call, you need to make sure you're switching out the gloves. You don't want to keep the gloves on, use those same ones, because now you've touched something dirty, which means you contaminated the gloves. After handling raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready to eat food, if you're not bare handing that raw meat, poultry, and fish. If you do, you got, of course, make sure you have very thorough hand washing going on for that. And if all else fails, after 4 hours of continuous use. But I mean, that's assuming though you're doing 4 hours of the same thing in a row. Now, if you're doing catering where you're going to feed 500 people, that might not be unusual if you're doing the same thing to try to prep for this 500 person or 1,000 person dinner. But in a lot of instances, you're probably not doing the same thing for 4 hours of continuous use. And so you'll probably be changing it more often than that. But, just in case that it goes into there. So just, again, food for thought. Other personal hygiene, we need to make sure that the staff is showering or bathing before work. Again, you would think that would be pretty standard, but not always. And then make sure you set up a dress code and make sure that you're following and making sure your staff are following the dress code as well. We have a uniform policy for the culinary program. You'll need that. That will be part of what you're doing with 150. You'll get that information. We'll have that stuff for you so you know ahead of time. Most all the stuff you can actually purchase through the bookstore. So that's pretty easy. But then we have a dress code as far as policies when it comes to nails, when it comes to jewelry, things of that nature, kind of like I alluded to earlier as far as with your nails and stuff. But you need to make sure your work, if you're running that kitchen, that you have a dress code for work and making sure that that dress code is being followed. Speaking of work attire, all right. Food handlers, you're working with food, you must use hair restraints. It is required, even for us bald people. Y'all can't see me, but I don't have any hair. But we still need to wear a clean hat or hair restraint when working in the prep area. You're not allowed to wear hair accessories that could become physical contaminants. So your hair needs to be up and in whatever that hair restraint is. You should not be wearing false eyelashes. Again, they could fall out and become a physical contaminant. If you have longer beards, especially, a beard restraint is needed to cover up facial hair. Now that varies by county. I know here in Central Illinois, beard restraint is not required unless you've got like a ZZ Top beard type going on. You got some epic beard going. Then they would ask you to wear a beard, what we call beard bag or a beard restraint. That's just to keep hair from falling into the food, just like the hat is for keeping hair from your head from falling into the food. There are counties I know up in the Chicagoland area that if you have just the tiny amounts of hair on your face, so facial hair going on, you've got a goatee, you've got a mustache, something like that, they do require covering with the beard restraint. We do have them here at the Culinary Institute. If you are one of those epic beard people that have it, then we will ask you to wear it. But if you have a well-trimmed beard, goatee, mustache, we do not require you to wear it because it's not, it's not something here in Peoria County that they're like, you have to have, the beard restraint, just because you have a little bit of facial hair going on. But be aware that if you do have facial hair, that you might be required to wear that beard restraint. Again, that's just kind of par for the course when it comes to working in our industry, especially if you have facial hair. Clean clothing, again, should be, I would think, a no-brainer, but we're making sure that the uniforms are being changed, including our aprons when they're soiled. When you purchase your uniforms, we say that we require, I'll say require, it's always highly suggested that you purchase 2 chef's jackets, 2 pairs of pants, 2 aprons, 2 hats, 4 towels or so, just so you have a process that you can have hopefully a clean one at all times when you're coming into class. Street clothing and personal belongings will go in designated areas. They do not go into the kitchen with us. Of course, dirty clothes and stuff we want to keep out of the food and prep area and all that. When we are, being conscientious of, the first part of being a professional is looking the part, and that is with your clean chef whites, making sure everything looks really, really nice. We don't require you to go and starch or have your, uniforms dry cleaned and all that. But again, we want to make sure that they look nice. It doesn't look like you had them crumpled up in your, back of your car and just pulled out, give a couple shakes and call it a day type of thing. So please be conscientious of that when it comes to your chef's jacket and pants. As far as your apron and your hat and towels, those you typically put on when you come into the kitchen. So when you're sitting in the classroom with one of the faculty here, your jacket and pants are fine, but you would not have your apron, your hat, or your side towels on. Okay. When you're taking a lecture class, you're taking an in-person lecture class, maybe you're taking nutrition with Chef Golda, and you're in her class. If you're in your whites, that's fine, although street clothes are perfectly fine for that class. But you wouldn't be wearing your apron, hat, or towels sitting in the classroom with Chef Golda for nutrition class. So anytime you are leaving the kitchen area, you're going to remove the apron. So that means when you go out for a potty break, if you have to go to the restroom, don't walk in there with your apron. Make sure you take that off before you leave the kitchen. And then of course, your apron is not a towel. It's not a side towel. It's not a dirty towel. It's not for wiping your hands on. It's for protection for you. So please, please, please keep that in mind. Take that in consideration when it comes to working and when it comes to your apron. Okay. This is always an interesting one for people because people have very personal feelings when it comes to jewelry, but food handlers should not be wearing jewelry when you are working with food. And the reason why is because it's really easy for certain pieces of jewelry to potentially harbor bacteria because it's not easily cleanable. So you need to make sure you're removing your jewelry from your hands and arms before you're working in the kitchen. So you would want to remove your rings, except for a plain band. Bracelets, including medical bracelets, and watches are all things you want to remove because those are areas that are going to be potentially coming in contact with food. And I've had students in the past that talk about, it's my wedding ring and I've never taken it off. And so here at our program, we do have an exception for a wedding band if you choose. However, as I will tell you in 150, I'm going to tell you right now, do you really want the symbol for the love of your life in with raw pork and beef, or in with dough and getting pieces of dough from bread making stuck in that beautiful symbol of your love for the person that you're sharing your life with? So, it's one of those things that, there's a reason. We're not telling you not to do it, not wear it because we're just being buttheads. We're telling you not to wear it because we don't want to have potential for physical or biological contamination. when it comes to those things. Okay. And then you also, whatever jewelry is required to be removed by your company, make sure you follow along with with whatever the policy is. So it could be earrings, necklaces, facial jewelry. A lot of times there are issues if they fall off or become a physical contaminant. The other thing that we find too is dangly jewelry, things that are hanging low, potentially become issues for you. If your necklace you have a long necklace and it happens to come in contact with the mixer and it wraps it around the mixer area, guess what? That necklace is coming off whether you like it or not. And you might be going with it. So again, it's about safety when it comes to working in the kitchen. But they should have written policies at your facilities where you're working at. We have written policies when it comes to uniform and dress requirements and things like that when it comes to 150 and all your lab classes and stuff. Right. But as the person in charge, people are coming in, it is your responsibility as part of onboarding with new employees to let them make sure they are aware of what those policies are, making sure they have it in writing, all that fun stuff that goes along with it. Okay. Eating, drinking, smoking, and chewing gum or tobacco. So food handlers may only eat, drink, smoke, or chew gum and tobacco in designated areas. You're never supposed to be doing any of those things when you're prepping or serving food, when you're working in the prep areas, or you're working in areas that are used to clean utensils and equipment. And the reason why is all those items involve the hand to face procedure going on. Your hand is going to your face, whether you're putting food up there, whether you're putting a beverage, you're going to, smoke, or you're getting ready to put gum in or stuff like that. And remember, your saliva contains potentially pathogens in it. And so in the process of that, you could transfer that saliva to your hands, or it could be directly transferred to the food that's being handled. And so that's why you're not allowed to eat, drink, smoke, or chew gum or tobacco when performing the tasks that are indicated up here. So it's one of those, like, again, when it comes to eating, yes, you're going to be trying things because you need to make sure you know how that food tastes. Does it need more salt or pepper? Or, is it at the right consistency? Things like that. So you're going to need to try those things. But then when you try them, after you try them, you need to make sure you go and wash your hands, because you've just put your mouth up by your hand up by where your mouth is at. And now you potentially contaminated your hands. So you need to go wash your hands afterwards. Okay. Smoking, I mean, it's Illinois. We don't smoke in buildings anyway, public buildings at least. So, that should be a non-issue. Chewing gum or tobacco, again, same thing. Your hand, you have that hand to mouth that's going on with it. Plus, there's potential through chewing gum or chewing tobacco that there is saliva maybe being released during the chewing process too, that we don't want to come in contact with any food or to our body, that parts of our body that we could then transmit to food. So that's why we are very conscientious about that. Right. So some exceptions to that is if you're drinking from a correctly covered container, and that is where we are making sure that it is properly covered. And so a properly covered container has a lid with a straw, or one of those sip lid tops, those ones that will that have a full cover over it. So the picture on the upper right of the chef with the cup with the straw, that's the correct thing to be doing. So that's a proper lid with a container, because on a hot day in the kitchen, you do need to make sure you're keeping hydrated, because last thing you want to do is pass out due to dehydration during dinner service or something along those lines. But you have to make sure it has that lid on top, and with a straw or with one of those sip lid tops that just have the small opening that you can close up. But again, make sure when you're working with it and you're using it that you do go wash your hands. All right. Food may be tasted during prepping, just like you see in the picture on the bottom, using an improved utensil, and of course, using the utensil only once. So you're using a spoon to try a sauce, use that spoon once. And then if it's disposable, it goes in the garbage. If it's a metal spoon, it goes into usually a container that then we can wash them and reuse them. So you no double dipping when it comes to your utensils, okay? So again, be conscientious about those as well. So again, there are those things. So we do allow students to have a drink in the kitchen if it meets the criteria that's there. And of course, you're going to be sampling the food too to make sure that's correct. So again, make sure it's single use and stuff. And then when you get to a point where you actually get to try the finished product, we're done typically prepping at that time. So we just make sure we're making sure those two things are separate. Okay. So reporting health issues. If you as the person in charge needs to have that communication with your staff to tell staff to let you know when they're sick. They need to feel that they can come to you and let you know when they are actually sick. Now, the thing with that is the health department or other regulatory agencies might ask for proof to show that you've done that, just so you can have due diligence. So it can't come back to say, well, you didn't have this person not handling food. And so because of that it's traced back to your negligence that come with it. And so if somebody is reporting that they're sick, you should have a standard operating procedure, SOP set up where it talks about, there's a signed statement, which the staff has agreed to report the illness, documentation showing staff that's completed training, which includes information on important supporting illness. Interestingly enough, here in Illinois, all food handlers, anybody who handles food, are required to have the basic food handler license, like we had talked about way back in chapter 1. And, those are things that they do discuss in there. So they are knowing, but you still want to follow up, even if they have their food handler license. It's kind of one of those cover your butt type of things that as part of their onboarding, as part of the process of getting them trained and stuff, that there's documentation that they read over and they sign off that they understand it, kind of like you do for your syllabus. That you've read it, you understand it type of thing. And so something like a document that's showing that they've completed the training and things like that come into it. And then any signs or cards that remind staff to notify managers when they are sick. By having all of those and following through, those are some things that can help you as the person in charge to have proof that you've done this. So again, it's ways to prevent or showing that, hey, you're trying to do your due diligence to make sure you're not making people sick. Okay. So staff are required to report illnesses. If they're sick before they come to work, they need to contact and make sure to let them know that you're sick. If they get sick while they're working, they need to make sure that's reported to a manager. If they or someone they live with has been diagnosed with an illness from norovirus, hepatitis A, Shigella, E. coli, Salmonella, either non-typhoidal or Salmonella typhi, either of the Salmonellas, the staff must report that to management. That's a thing, again, that needs to be in the information that the staff is letting people know, right? If these things are happening, then we end up needing to move to that next step. But the other thing you might need to do is look at the illness themselves. But if a food handler is sick, you'll probably need to restrict them from working with food. You might even need to exclude them from coming into the operation, especially if they have vomiting, if they have diarrhea, jaundice, sore throat with a fever, infected wounds or boils, that's opening and draining unless they're properly covered. But all those things are stuff that you need to either restrict, or if any of those other ones, especially these, you want to exclude them. Because again, we don't want to play Russian roulette with our customers' health. All right. I know it's easy for us to get into that situation where, oh my gosh, Charles can't, is been vomiting, and but it's a busy Friday night. I need him on the line to cook. If not, we're going to be short staffed, and it's going to, be a pain. Well, by doing that, now you as the manager, the chef, the person in charge, you're playing Russian roulette with your customers' lives, because if Charles in this instance is working and he's got one of the illnesses that we have talked about, now he's potentially spreading it to all the customers and maybe the other employees. So now you end up having a foodborne illness outbreak. And then that's even worse for us, because we talked about that in chapter 1, the consequences of people getting sick at your establishment. So it's one of those that, yes, it's going to be definitely inconvenient to not have somebody there at work, but in the long run, it's probably much better than that person coming to work making other people sick and then you getting shut down because of a foodborne outbreak. Okay. So things to be thinking about. Okay. Other things you need to do is you need to watch for signs of illness, because sometimes our employees don't tell us what's going on because they need the hours, or they think that they're going to get fired if they're sick, or things along those lines. There's things that you need to deal with, but again, you have to also look at, again, that Russian roulette that comes along if you allow them in there. So, watch for signs. If they throw up, that's definitely a sign that, hey, maybe something's not all right. If they're taking a lot of trips to the bathroom, they could be having something going on. It might be good to inquire if everything is okay. If you notice yellowing of the skin, the eyes, the fingernails. If you notice there, cold sweats or chills, that's indicating of a fever. If there's a lot of nasal discharge and sneezing, yes, that can also be allergies. But again, sometimes that goes in with some of those other signs as well. So you just need to be watching and seeing, what stuff do we need to be conscientious about with those. So the if and then, whether we restrict or exclude. Okay. So if the food handler has an infected wound or a boil that's not properly covered, then we need to restrict them from working with food utensils and equipment. Okay. Doesn't mean we have to send them home or exclude them, but we do need to restrict them if it's not properly covered. But the thing is that's should be easy to remedy. And then they can still work with food as long as they're properly covered. Okay. If the food handler has a sore throat with a fever, if they are working with, if the food handler, you want to restrict them with sore throat and fever from working with food equipment, utensils equipment. If they're if they serve a high risk population, that's an automatic exclude. They need to have the day off to get better, because remember, high risk populations can get anything, foodborne illness, other illnesses and stuff, a lot easier than the general population. Right. Typically, with a sore throat and fever, you'll usually want a written release from a doctor before returning to work. Again, what you're doing there is, you're covering yourself to make sure that, yes, a trained medical professional has said it's okay for this person to be around food again. And then you have the documentation that shows that as well. That's also another reason why people that if they're sick, they don't like to tell people about it, because, again, we have to have our documentation, but nobody wants to take a trip to the doctor or to the prompt care or ER or what have you, or they can't afford it with those things that kind of going around. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But again, as the person in charge, we need to make sure we're balancing everybody's well-being. Yes, That person maybe an employee, they need to be working so they're making money, but also we don't need to make 25 people or plus sick because that person was handling food when they shouldn't have been, type of thing. If the food handler has a persistent sneeze, cough, or runny nose, and with discharges from the eyes, nose, and mouth, we want to restrict them from being exposed to food utensils and equipment. If the food handler has at least one of these symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, we want to exclude the handler from operation. Okay. If it's vomiting or diarrhea, before they can return to work, they have to either have no symptoms for 24 hours or a doctor's note. Now they say, release from medical practitioner, because it could be a, what's the word I'm looking for? A licensed nurse or somebody else that can write those as well. So some sort of medical provider it could be a written release, or at least 24 hours of no symptoms. If somebody has jaundice, you are required to report food handlers to the regulatory authority, to the health department. Okay. To exclude food handlers who have had jaundice for 7 days or less. If you've had jaundice, before you can return to work, you have to have, you should have both a release from your medical provider and approval from the health department. Okay. It's one that we really want to be conscientious about, making sure we're not allowing that to spread to anybody. So we want to take that very, very seriously. And in that case, the health department needs to be involved with that as well. Okay. So if the food handler is vomiting or has diarrhea and has been diagnosed with an illness caused by either noro, Shigella, or Salmonella, E. coli, or hepatitis A or the other Salmonella, we have to exclude them from operating. And we also have to report this to the regulatory authority, to the health department as well. And then we're working with the medical professionals and the health department as well, because again, the last thing we want is somebody who for one thing, we want to see where they got it, right? So they're going to do some contact tracing, and they're going to try to work its way back to see where that person got that virus, because it could be an outbreak. When you see food recalls or things along those lines, it's because somebody has gotten this. It's been reported to the health department. There's a network then within the health departments as far as information on people who have gotten these illnesses, and they can look for patterns to see if this is a pattern or is this just a isolated incident. Either way is bad, but at least an isolated incident, it's something that can be contained hopefully relatively easily. If it's a outbreak, then it could be going to a lot of different places, and we need to make sure that we are being proactive about it as an industry and people, to making sure that we are making sure that our people are not getting sick. So chapter 4, as far as a safe food handler, that gives us how we should be looking at ourselves as far as how can we prevent and be proactive against making our customers sick. So things that are back of mind for a lot of people, but it's not something we always think about. We need to make sure we're conscientious about it. And when you are in a position of authority, you not only are making sure you're following those, but you also have to make sure that those that are under you are following these policies and procedures as well. I joke with a lot of my classes, being a chef is more than just being a great cook. You also have to be a manager. It's managing people, whether it's the actual management of them in what they're doing and how they're doing their job, or things like sanitation, making sure that they're not doing things that are going to potentially make our customers sick, or cause issues that are going to be a negative for the business that you're working for. So that is chapter 4 on the safe food handler.